and you think in terms of black and white, you go, oh, no, rock bad, that's it. Wait a minute. But as you get older, you go, no, buddy, some rocks there could be snakes under, but other rocks have no snakes under them. And some snakes are poisonous and some snakes aren't. In other words, we learn to see some of those finer points that we're not able to see as children. Unfortunately, when it comes to anger, and I've spent a career dealing with people who are angry, we tend to define people by those one or two characteristics and then just keep them in that, even though they're constantly growing, changing, and evolving. We want to pigeonhole them to that.
That's a really good segue, because I wanted to shift a little bit from what yield theory is, and the book, again, is Walking Through Anger, toward how you're applying that in prison, because there's a lot of people in prison who are angry.
So many different reasons, too. So I was talking to a doctor the other day who said, everybody's angry in prison. And I said, I'm interested. Tell me about what their anger is. And so I was like listening to people who've never been into prison. Tell me what prison is. So he gave me his idea. And I said, that's a great idea. Unfortunately, that's not reality. People in prison are angry for lots of different reasons. Some of those reasons are toward others. A very small percentage is anger toward people because they say they're completely innocent, and maybe they are, but that's so far and few between. And for instance, a lot of times people are innocent of the crime they were convicted of, but guilty of a different crime that may be even worse, but they didn't get convicted of. So the system's not as silly as a television or news might want to make it out to be. I think that to recognize and understand that prison is it's complicated. There are people who are angry in prison, but there are different types. Again, one might be sudden rage, where people are ready to snap in a second. There's another type of anger that's called abandonment rage, where people are worried they're going to be left. Shame-based rage. There are different types of. Actually, that'd be cool to talk about those different types of rage, because they actually apply to all of us on some scale.
Yeah, why don't you break that down? Because I'm really interested. And if you could do me a favor, keep your mouth to the microphone there. It sounded like you were on your chin there for a second.
No, yeah, definitely. So there are different types of rage that we experience, different types of anger. Ron Potter Efron, who is, honest to goodness, I was kind of nervous to meet him. This guy's a giant in the field. He's written several books. I'd like to believe I've read most of whatever he's written. Anything that's in print that can be accessed, I'd say I bought and read. So when I finally met him a few years ago, and I'm so thankful, it's kind of surreal for me to say that he actually not only endorsed my book, but wrote a foreword for my book, because he's incredible. Again, his name's Ron Potter Efron. But he developed what's called different types of rage. And what he taught was that some aspect, this makes so much logical sense. So picture this. The one type of rage is what is called abandonment rage. And abandonment rage occurs when we get extraordinarily angry because we believe that we're going to be abandoned. Now, from a deep, evolutionary perspective, again, think, 10, 20,000 years ago, we're moving in groups. And if someone was kicked out of the group, well, they don't have a good chance to survive. So being abandoned by a group might be hardwired into our DNA to make us have a strong reaction.
So now, real quick, so when I teach emotions, I teach the Carol Izzard 10 emotions, discrete emotions in the brain, and I actually talk about the evolutionary purpose of emotion and keeping us together in tribes and so forth. What you're describing sounds more like fear to me, like we're afraid to be left behind, but you're describing it as anger. Help me understand that.
So, and again, when we talk about evolutionary psychology, we are talking about conjecture. And if someone's out there going, what's conjecture? It's a fancy word that means guesswork. In other words, I'm taking information, and I do a lot of this, and I actually purport a lot of evolutionary psychological ideas. But I understand that these are just theories. These are just ideas that come to me, and I say, you know what? It sounds like this might make sense. But one of them is this concept that if we are going to be abandoned, we have to look at, oh my goodness, what if we were abandoned and it was a time when we couldn't just fend for ourselves? That would be really scary. And I honestly believe, so here's, I have to say, I have a case I saw one time. It was one of the most pronounced examples of this. But there was a guy who was he wasn't like, he even described himself as, I'm not a manly man and all that kind of stuff. But he had really severely beaten his wife. And so when he didn't understand why he did what he did, and when he first started to talk, I was like, oh, okay, this sounds like typical denial and things like that. Well, then I did a group on the different types of rage. And when I do these types of rage, I actually pass out. So I do a workbook. My workbook is the anger management workbook, but I do types of rage, and I passed it out. And so he filled this out. Well, he's back there, and you could tell he's holding back tears. And when it came time to discuss the group, I said to him, what's going on? And he said, when I saw this right now, he said, this just hit me in a different way. He said, so let's get this picture. So I'm sitting in a group of people who are convicted of violent crimes. This man in particular definitely admitted to beating his wife, said he had a history of not being violent, never really had violence in his life. Well, when he read about abandonment rage, here's what kicked in. When he was a very small child, his parents would travel all over the world, and they would leave him with a nanny. And they always told him, when you reach a certain age, we'll take you with us. Well, he reached that age, and his parents came in, sat down. He said, I'll never forget it. My mom said, came in, I had my suitcase packed, and he said, no, honey, we're not taking you with us this year. We'll do it next year. Wow. And he was like, you told me my whole life it was this year. So anyway, flash forward 30 or 40 some years later, man was in his mid-50s. His wife said, I'm leaving you. And he snapped.
Wow.
He just snapped. And the visceral, and this is the part that's hard to express over a podcast, the visceral reaction from him in the way he was crying, talking about it, and had this cathartic mode. I mean, like, everybody in the room, we all felt that catharsis, like, holy crap, like this, you're right, that's powerful. Your parents left you, and now your wife says, I'm leaving you. And again, Jake, and you know this about me, and you and I do this kind of work. I would never condone violence. I'm not excusing it. I'm not saying what he did was okay in any way, shape, or form. He definitely should have served the time he served. What I'm saying is my job has never been to excuse behavior. It's to explain it. And that's all I'm doing is explaining, saying, yeah, it makes sense why he did what he did. And imagine if the world was armed with this information. And, for instance, in class, he would have learned, don't do this. Well, he would have found a different way to deal with it, I think.
Yeah, we would think that, through teaching, hopefully now, because social emotional education, something called SEL, you may have heard that in curriculum around the countries and schools, is now becoming a thing. And we're teaching our children emotional functioning. We're teaching them how to express and label and claim and then tolerate their emotions so that we don't have explosions of violence. And so it's possible that, had he been aware of this and realized what was going on within him physiologically, he could have just wrote it through, returned to frontal lobe function, thought it through, sat down with his wife and discussed it rather than exploding on her, if that theory is correct, right?
Yes, that's it.
So what are some other kinds of rage?
So some other types of rage. So then we have, but I don't want to, I kind of wish we could highlight this.
Yeah, stay there as long as you want.
Because if this was a movie, we would kind of put it in, what you just said was pretty profound. He would have had a conversation. He would have said, the moment you said that just triggered something in me. I don't know what, but it triggered something in me. And then they would have started to discuss it. And had they gone back and looked at it, because just to give our listeners a time frame, I taught the types of rage in a 15-minute lecture. I then passed out a worksheet and has the different types of rage. And each worksheet only asks 2 questions per type of rage. So we're not talking about a long period of time. So you're talking about within 30 minutes, a man who not only did what he did, but was able to recognize that all of that happened within 30 minutes. And again, I know you see this all the time. I do. This is the type of therapy we do. This is why we're passionate. But I really want our listeners to hear that, because imagine within 30 minutes how different if he would have gone to his wife and said something different. I'm triggered. I'm pissed. I'm furious right now. let's explore, let me figure this out. And just by doing that, or even saying what you said to me right a few minutes ago, something along the lines of, let's stick with this, or let's hold this. I mean, just doing something like that can radically change the way the outcome happens.
So I want to, if we can hover here for a second, because I want to ask you a really, really challenging question. It may invoke a little bit of politics and policy, because we're talking about prison reform broadly as a country. We're trying to figure out what to do to get people rehabilitated and out on the streets. And largely the narrative consumes a lot of like drug offenders. And it doesn't make any sense as a progressing, industrialized, forward-thinking nation to throw people in cages for eating or smoking the wrong plant. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense, right? So the question is, and we're talking violence, and it's a different animal, and I understand that, but at some point, someone has to do some sort of evaluation on these people who have been convicted of these crimes and determine that they're quote-unquote fit to re-enter society with a reasonable prediction that they're not going to reoffend. And so far, the system has been serve some arbitrary time, and then you're somehow magically returned, and we presume you to be rehabilitated, but there's no rehabilitation taking place. What you're talking about is rehabilitation. But my question is, how do we know that guy in that moment isn't just completely better? He's like, oh, I have my insight, I'll never happen again. Because we've seen that in our work, for sure. But how do we make that promise to society, I guess?
Right. I'm actually working with the Pennsylvania parole system. It's one of the largest parole systems in our country. And I am working with them on developing ways to assess this. Because you're right, like in that cathartic moment, like that particular guy, not only did he make that change that day, I'm telling you about an experience from about 9 years ago. So I know that change stuck, because I actually heard from him recently. Things have been going well. Things have always been going well for him after that. So that particular, it's anecdotal, and I would never purport, because I teach, for years as a professor, I used to say to students, question everything, even question me. And if I try to, give you a end-all statement, make sure you're mindful that that's not realistic. So sure, I have a very true anecdotal information, but I would never want to say, oh, because I have this anecdotal information, it's now fact for everyone. And that is something that I think is important for us to teach.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned evidence-based practice earlier, and you and I can chuckle about that because I think it's been overly broadly applied. But it is important that we have some semblance of coherence, and we're not just cherry-picking data to make policies out of it. That's dangerous.
Right.
So what are you working with the parole and probation department on?
So what I do is, spent 21 years now in my career. I specialize in people who've been convicted of violent crimes. I have a pretty good gut intuition when I meet people and when I assess people what might be happening. But I want to be able to bottle that and have people understand it. So what I'm doing, and this is pretty revolutionary. I think it's revolutionary in regard to the research that's being done and has been done historically. So I feel grateful, and of course, I'm going to share it on your podcast first.
Heck yeah!
But this is what I'm doing. We assess people's violence historically on the violent event that brought them into prison. Now, what I'm about to say, it's going to sound so logical. You're going to say, well, of course. But I know you appreciate this, but I would love for your listeners to appreciate. No one has known this yet. So we assess people based off the violence that occurred, based on their ability to articulate in a convincing way that they show remorse for that situation.
Right.
What I'm proposing is that we don't even bring up the event that the person brought the person in, but the event that happened last week, the event that happened 2 days ago. Because when we can assess a person's current ability to react to unpleasant stimuli or impulsive motivations, and when we can assess how they're doing with that, we have a better assessment of how they're going to fare when they get out of prison. Because if I have somebody who, we could have somebody we assess, and maybe they did something that was not impulsive, but premeditated to get into prison.